name's Ray Gravstone. I was born in Woodanilling in 1931 and I was born in the Woodanilling Cottage Hospital.
My name's Judy Nixon. I was Judy Shaw. I was born in Wagen and came to Woody, I think I was probably about 4 years old when I came here to live with my mum and dad.
And I lived here, I went to school here, and I came back after school and worked on the farm, and I lived here for over 60 years.
Shifted out here. I went to school here until the school burnt down.
Woodanilling was founded in 1892.
We're here because of my grandfather, who came out here from England as a young lad and developed a farm in Katanning. And in the 1880s, and from there my father came to Woodanilling.
I've lived here all the years since then.
The first settlers came to the area looking for green pastures for the sheep. But soon after this, the cutters came and cut down all the sandalwood trees.
About 3 miles towards Moojabing, and he built a house there, and we were all reared on the farm about 3 miles up the road. The house is still there.
And I'm still here. And don't show any signs of moving away.
Woodanilling got its name from little fish called wooden by the Aboriginal people.
It was a good start in life anyway, and living and farming in Woodanilling, it's been very few real problems.
Population was 800 people and estimated today at 400 people.
In the early days of Woodanilling, it was mainly sheep farming. George Jeffreys was the first sheep farmer.
Yes, there always seemed to be horses around, wasn't there?
Yes, it was, yeah.
Mainly trotters, there were no gallopers. We walked to school most of our lives, but we did have a horse there for a few years, and horse and cart, and we used to bring it in, like Judy said, and we used to tie it up under a tree over near the hospital and give it a big tub of chaff to eat. And sometimes when we leave school, we'd all go back to put the horse back in the sulky again. The horse would be gone because we never did the knot up properly. And so we'd hop in the one would get in the shafts of the sulky, and we'd pull it in one couple of push, and we'd push it along for about a couple of kilometres up the road to where the first gate was, and the horse would be just standing there waiting for us. And we'd harness it up again and go on our way. The horses today are a different thing altogether to what they used to be. When, as a child, of course, the horses were working horses, big Clydesdales, and it was just part of our life. Feeding horse from everlasting, cutting chaff, and the horses were all work horses. We had ponies on the farm, and the big draft horses to put our crop in and take it off. And even as a child, we had to bring wheat into Woodanilling on a wagon, and most farmers were very well attached to their horses because they were their life. And it was a pretty sad day when the tractors started coming in during the 1940s, and all the horses, a few remained. We kept cart horses right up in the 1950s, but the horses were, well, without horses this country could never develop at all. And, the girls liked the horses, and well, my daughter's got horses too, so. And, it's good to get the children outside, absolutely outside.
We really are passionate about horses.
Welcome to the Woodanilling Heritage Walk. We have decided to ride our ponies on the walk today.
practically all my lifetime, everything went by rail. We had to bring the wool down here and load it onto railway trucks. And my wife and I used to come and help me. She'd come out and we would pack these rotten old small little railway trucks up with bales of wool. And the grain was brought down mainly in bags, and that was brought down and put in the CBH bins here. And practically everything we had, and everything came down by train those days. The bags for our grain, and the wool went away, and the grain went away all by rail. There was practically no road transport at all. In fact, we weren't allowed to use road transport. We virtually had to use a railway line because it was here.
The railway lines were built in the late 1880s. The first permanent railway line resident was Harry Stevens.
You know, Woodanilling had a better grain retrieval centre than Katanning or Wagin those days. It was a big centre and the trucks used to come from everywhere. And it wasn't always, but at times you'd bring your grain in the morning and you wouldn't get unloaded the next day. It was that bad. And this was all bag grain, and you'd see the trucks all lined up everywhere, and it was all bags were lifted onto the trucks manually and brought in, and all different sizes of trucks. Our truck used to bring about 50 bags in, and one truck used to come in with 13 bags. And I imagine coming a long way with 13 bags of grain, and that was put into the elevators, big elevators, and put into the silo. But before that, or mostly even those days, our barley all had to be bagged and sewn and sent away on rail trucks. And that was always a problem, getting rail trucks. Rail trucks were never readily available, and it was a lot of very hard work.
Lots of goods like mallet bark, grain, wool and sandalwoods were shipped in and out by rail. There are big quantities of grain, and there still are big quantities of grain being railed out of Woodanilling.
The Woodanilling Hotel that's there today, the one you see today, that's the second hotel. The first hotel was just this side of it, and there's photographed in the Woodanilling book again, and that was built out of granite.
We are at the Woodanilling Tavern. The first owner was Mr. Bell. He built it in 1908.
Oh, I guess there was arguments there. I think it's generally a pretty peaceful thing. I know they had 9 o'clock closing, was it, in the early days?
Yeah, I think
with
it
being
was 9 o'clock.
I know one mob of farmers got in one night and they stopped there and they had a few beers and they talked, and the police came out to see whether it was closed, and they all shot out the window and ran in all directions, and apparently one farmer from out of Dumwyung was there and he left his hat there, and the police confiscated it, and apparently, of course the police never knew he was in there, and he went back to the police station in Katanning and asked if he had his hat. If they had his hat.
The bank was built the 27th of May 1912. The bank was closed during the war and turned into a command post.
Wouldn't know when it closed, but I can remember as a child in the 1940s when the war was on, there were great big signs up with aeroplane identification charts on the outside of it. There's a story about it in the Woodanilling book about the banker coming out from Katanning in a horse and cart those days, horse and sulky, and taking the day's takings, and used to always carry a revolver with him, and apparently came out and he must have went into the hotel for a few beers and went off back to Katanning and left the money on the bench there with a revolver and everything. But there was no problem those days, no one would have stolen it.
This is the Woodanilling War Memorial. These are the names of the heroic and brave men and women who fought in the war. Richardson store, one of the 5 general stores found in the area. Back in the day, this general store sold sandalwood, bark, poison, animal skins, canned food, and biscuits. Besides being a local goods store, it was also a boots and drapery store. It also sold Bushell's tea.
The people who built the store, Richardson store, Bob Richardson built their store, I think probably in the 19th century, I think, probably the 1890s, I think it was built, and he was a marvellous chap. He ran the store, and of course all the farmers used to come in and to book everything up those days and put on the docket and pay it monthly, and of course a lot of farmers never had the money to pay it, but he was a very generous man and he was an excellent citizen. But you could buy just about anything there, couldn't you?
Oh yes, there was everything there. You could get petrol there. They had a bowser there between the shop and the house.
Yeah, and buy your oil and everything for the farm practically.
The milk truck used to come in, 2 or 3 times a week, yes, and drop bottled milk off in the crates, and yeah, you could get, well, really wasn't anything you couldn't get there.
Is a place where local ladies can be. They did lots of fundraising, knitting socks and rugs.
The country women get pretty isolated really, you know. The farmers have got their farm, the women just got the house, so it's a good thing.
But that's been around for a long, long time. I know my grandmother was a member of the CWA for years.
And it was a good organisation, and it's still pretty good today, although they don't get many members today, but it serves a useful purpose. The farmers got together again and built a store, and they pulled the old hall down and they carted the locals, farmers and that, carted all the rocks up and built this present store, which was called a cooperative store and owned by the shareholders. But that store's been there a long time, and that's a second-hand store because it built out those second-hand rocks out of that old building. And that went along very, very well, and we used to buy all our wool packs and all our fuel, and everything was bought there. Practically nothing was bought in Katanning. The original road board office was built down near the hotel, and that was just a little tin shed. I think Ernie Patelko, the first secretary, built that. And then when they built the new hotel, which is the one that's there now, that's the second hotel that's there now. When they built the new one, they shifted the building up alongside of where the shop is. But it's a bit different to what they have for Shire council offices today.
The church was built in 1908. It was designed by a local farmer, Henry Kippen. The church was known as the busy bee of the community.
And the Kippen family, which are still here, they were very involved. I can remember Mrs. Kippen in the 1940s, this old lady walking down from the farm down there to clean the church, and they sort of took over running the church, and they're probably still doing it.
A few of the local girls were married there over the years when we were all getting married in those late teens, early 20s, and got married a lot younger then than what we do now, what people do now.
The hospital was built in 1916, but they ran out of money and had to stop building. They eventually finished in 1918. It was sold in 1928 to Richard Wilcox, and it's still a private property.
There was a matron ran the hospital, and there was a nurse there, and one of the nurses I won't say her name, but it's all in the Woodanilling book, but she was a rather attractive nurse, and of course a lot of the farmers' sons started getting sick all the time, and
This is the salmon gum tree. It's the tallest tree in Woodanilling. Most trees grow to 24 to 30 metres high, but our salmon gum tree is 34 metres high.
I spend all my spare time, I study natural history, and of course the trees and that, I love the trees and the animals and everything else, and that particular tree is extremely interesting because it's reputed to be one of the biggest salmon gums probably in the world, I suppose, when you think about it. Salmon gums are mainly found east of Woodanilling, and they don't go very far west. The rubber line sort of divides the geographical area. You know, you go west and you get into different trees you do going out east. But that is a big tree, and I think the glass are nesting in it now because it's got older, starting to form hollows. It's reputed to be over 100 feet. I measured it, and I reckon it was only 90 feet, but now the people that know what they're doing reckon it's over 100 feet now.
Perhaps it's grown, Ray. Perhaps it's grown a bit.
I don't think so, no. I think it's sort of matured, I think. Wonderful school at Woodanilling. There were 2 classrooms, and in the 1940s, of course, there was a Great War was on then. As if the Depression wasn't enough, the Great War came, and we had quite an influx of children from Perth coming down. People were taken out of England, they were also taken out of Perth too, to get away from the threat of war, which was quite a big thing those days. And we had a different class of kids come down to Woodanilling. They were quite worldly wide kids really, and a bit of a handful for the teachers at the time, and I think the numbers built up from about 30 to about 40 there for a while during those war years.
The school was built in 1906. The school was burnt down in 1949 by a spark from a fire that was never covered.
I think it was only about 6 months after I started school, the school actually burnt down. And came down to go to school that morning because we didn't know, we were just a little bit out of town, and no school. It was all ashes.
The school was rebuilt in 1951. This is my school now. Woo!
We hope you enjoyed our Woodanilling Heritage Walk. Woo!
Oh yes, well Woody's always been my home, so to me it's, yes, well it's the only place to be really, and it'll always be home. Even if I shifted away, it'll still be home as far as I'm concerned.
A lot of things are disappearing in the country that used to be there. Little towns are fading away, but Woodanilling's growing. So.
Welcome to Woodanilling!
One day there was a publican who went to the pub. The manager who managed the pub that was here went to the pub.
The bank.
He managed the
He
bank.
managed
He
the
was
bank.
bank manager.
We need to do it one more time, just quickly.
One more time, okay?
Welcome to Woodanilling!
Perfect! Do you want to talk? Do you? What do you want to say?